Steve Rode and Damon Day are coming at you fast, getting you out of debt with their true romance. Steve's the yin to Damon's yang, and they are here to save the day. A couple debt superheroes, Steve and Damon coming your way.
All right, we're back with another quality podcast of Debt-Free Dudes with Damon Day. My name's Steve, and Damon is here today to talk about...
Today we are talking about debt settlement, what it is, what it isn't, and whether or not it's something you should consider if you're falling behind on your bills.
So everyone hears about debt settlement all the time, whether they got something in the mail or they saw something online. I don't see that many TV commercials for debt settlement these days, but what exactly is debt settlement? Is it your creditors are just cutting your interest rates because you're a good person?
No, debt settlement is actually negotiating the principal balances down. And there's a lot of misinformation out there, and there's just so many different words that people use where people talk about, debt consolidation or debt management. And oftentimes what they're really referring to is debt settlement. They've just packaged it up in a little bit different bow.
Okay. So, tell me exactly what debt settlement is. How does the process work? So I know it involves debt and it involves settlement, but what exactly is that? I don't understand.
Well, that's a good question, Steve. So, and the reason I wanted to devote today's show to debt settlement is because so many consumers out there just don't understand what debt settlement is. And I don't want to make today's show, picking on debt settlement companies, because there's definitely a time and a place for when debt settlement in a client situation is appropriate. But there's just so much bad information out there that consumers are making uninformed decisions about, high amounts of debt. And I wanted to really just actually, for selfish reasons, take the time to really explain what it is and what it isn't to save me time during my consultations. So if every potential client could listen to this show first, if they have questions about debt settlement, and then call me, I could spend more time on productive things rather than explaining what the salesperson said that was actually incorrect.
All right. Tell me if this sounds familiar or not. I'm a consumer, and all of a sudden I woke up one morning and I started panicking about my debt or worried about my income. And I saw something online or I got something in the mail, and I called a phone number, and the person said to me, we have the perfect program. It'll cut your debt in half. You'll pay it off for a lot less money in interest, and your credit will be fine afterwards. And the program, there's no upfront fee. It sounds magical, but what's the reality there?
And, that's pretty much verbatim a typical debt settlement pitch. They want to kind of throw out all the rosy parts and really kind of ignore how it really works. But so in a nutshell, debt settlement is nothing more than falling behind on your bills, hopefully not on purpose, and getting to a point where a creditor is willing to accept a haircut in order to get some kind of return on that account and close it out. And it's not some kind of easy monthly payment plan, the way these debt settlement companies portray it to be, where they come in and they say, oh, well, you owe $50,000 in debt and you're paying whatever it is, $1,250 a month on minimum payments. I've got a great program for you. You hire us and you only have to pay whatever, $850 a month for the next 4 years. And we've got great relationships with these creditors, yada, yada, yada. And as long as you pay the $850 a month in 4 years, you're going to be debt free. And it doesn't work that way. It's not some nice, neat little payment plan, packaged up to where you just have to pay $850 a month, which of course sounds great because it's $400 less than you were paying before, or $500 or whatever it was. And so it's a very easy sales pitch to make, but that's not actually what's happening.
So it sounds like up front that salespeople oftentimes give the impression that your creditors totally on board, they're on the same page, they want to extend this offer, but that's not the case, is it?
No, and I mean, debt settlement's like jumping out of an airplane, right? I mean, you have a parachute and you're pretty sure it's going to open, but you're not 100% sure it's going to open. And not to scare anybody, but that's the reality. I mean, when you fall behind on a debt, you are breaching the agreement. So
what are the consequences?
yeah, you can be sued. You can be sued. You can have a judgment. You could have your wages garnished, depending on what state you're in. I mean, it's pretty serious stuff. And so it requires a lot more understanding before you jump into something when a sales guy is just simply saying, oh, hire us and it's going to be great. And you just pay $850 a month. There's a lot more to the story. And it's important that consumers understand it and make educated decisions, because there's certainly times where negotiating debts makes good sense for a consumer, but there's also times where negotiating debts makes absolutely no sense. And the problem is, in most of those cases where it doesn't make sense, you'll find salespeople trying to sell it anyway.
Now, I can think of a couple of examples when it did not make sense, but can you give us an example of something that you've run into?
Oh, I can give you a million examples, but the ones I always point to are the really obvious ones, because a lot of my clients come to me, they find me after they've enrolled in various programs, whether it's a debt settlement company or credit counseling or whatever, and they get into these programs, and then maybe they start doing some research after the fact because maybe they made an emotional decision early and they just wanted the stress and the fear to go away, and this whole idea of having this company supposedly take away that stress and fear was a good idea. And then they start doing some more research and realizing, hey, wait a minute, maybe this wasn't such the right decision, or maybe I didn't quite understand what I was getting into. They stumble across my website, and then, we have a conversation. But oftentimes I see people in situations where, let's say they're on a fixed income, say they're retired, they're, on Social Security, they're judgment proof. They're in situations where creditors couldn't really do much to them anyway, or bankruptcy just makes absolute sense for their situation. And I had a client one time, I remember this was years ago. She was a widow. She was on Social Security. She was making, I think it was $1,500-$1,600 a month, something like that on Social Security. And she had, I don't know, 50-60 grand in debt. It was a lot of debt. There's no way she could ever pay it. I mean, Dave, you could read all of Dave Ramsey's books, and she was not going to be able to pay off this debt in a traditional way. But she was completely judgment proof. She had no assets. And yet when she called me, she was enrolled in this debt settlement program, and she was paying, it was like $700 a month for 4 years for this debt settlement program. It was literally half of her income she was giving away to this debt that she literally could have filed a Chapter 7 on for $1,600 or whatever the fee would be for, a local attorney, and been done with it, within a couple of months. Or if she didn't want to do that, she literally could have just ignored it. I mean, there would have been nothing the creditors could have done to her, but yet some salesperson had convinced her that the only way to deal with this was to pay them $700 some odd a month and live on half of her measly Social Security for 4 years. It made no sense.
There's so much to unpack from what you just gave us in that example. So, for example, let me nip at it a little bit. When you talk to a debt settlement company, are you talking to, I'm doing air quotes, what you would qualify as a financial advisor, or what is the capacity of the person that you're talking to?
Well, that's the irony of the whole deal. And that's kind of, how when I started, going off on my own and doing my consulting, this was like 20 some odd years ago, I recognized this fact. And to me, it was so blatantly obvious, but you have consumers that are in debt, right? They're scared. Maybe they have creditors calling them. They don't know what to do. They see stuff on TV, the ads online. They're scared of bankruptcy. They see things like debt consolidation and credit counseling and debt settlement. And they're calling these companies, right, for advice. I mean, that's what they're calling for. They need advice. They don't know what to do. And they're trying to do their due diligence and figure it out. And, how do I handle this 50 grand that I can't afford? And the problem is, you're as a consumer, you're making these calls looking for advice, looking for information. But what you're getting are just straight up sales pitches for the most part about why you should hire that company to solve whatever the problem is. And the problem is everybody that calls in is getting pretty much that same pitch or presentation, regardless of what their circumstances are. And then you think, okay, well, that was some information. Let me call this other company, and then let me call this other company. Let me call all these companies so I could do my research, right? But all you're getting is just different versions of the same sales pitch, where one guy's trying to sell against the other guy. Oh, this guy's got an $850 payment. I got an $800 payment because this is $1,000 commission for me, or whatever it is. And so you step back, you've got all this information swirling in your head. Most of it isn't even correct. And then the ultimate irony is you, the consumer, are then left trying to decide what you should do. And their job is just to sell it to you. But the purpose of that phone call was to have them help you figure out what to do. And that's absolutely not what they're doing.
Now, you mentioned the word commission. So the person that you're talking to is actually motivated to close the sale, to sign you up as a client as fast as possible so they can earn money, right? Because they're getting paid a certain amount when they make that sale. So their motivation is not to provide the best advice, is it?
Well, that's correct. And, I don't want to paint everybody with a broad brush, because I know there are good people out there. And again, the point of this podcast was not to disparage settlement companies or credit counselors, but the point of this podcast was to help educate consumers so they understand that the conversation they're having is not financial advice. And for the most part, the person on the other end of that phone, if you're calling a debt settlement company, they're not there looking at your situation and trying to help you decide if maybe you should call a bankruptcy attorney, or maybe you should really look at doing something else, or maybe this is something really you can do on your own with a few phone calls, or whatever it is. Their job is, hey, lead comes in, company pays for this lead, because as a consumer, that's what you are. You're a lead when you fill out a form online or whatever. And their job, as Steve mentioned, is to make that sale, bring revenue into the company. Their job is not to help you figure out if you should buy the product. That would be like, going onto a car lot and the guy runs out and greets you with a big smile. And you say, hey, I'm really confused. I like my car. I'm just not sure about it. This one was really shiny. Do you think it's a good time to buy a new car?
Yeah, that's the example I was going to use. But you're absolutely right. I mean, if you roll into the Ford dealership, they're not going to say, you need to go to Toyota.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, exactly.
They're going to close the deal on the Ford.
Yeah, exactly. So, and again, that's not necessarily a bad thing if you know as a consumer what you're getting on the other end of the phone. So the important thing is, before you start calling all these companies, have a plan, have an understanding of what it is that company is probably going to do. And I know I can say that, but consumers are going, well, how am I supposed to do that? I mean, where do I go to get the information? And that's a shameless plug, because the answer is call me. I'll tell you. I will tell you what the salesman said, and then we can look at the contract and we can decide, did what he say or she say match what's written on the paper? Usually it doesn't.
Let's compare the difference. So when someone talks to someone like you, a financial advisor, a debt coach, you're looking at their overall situation, where they were, where they are today, where they want to go, as opposed to just trying to close the sale on a settlement, right?
Yeah. And don't get me wrong, I'm trying to close the sale too. I mean, everybody's trying to close a sale. That's the way business works, right? The difference is, what I sell is advice, right? I'm selling, hey, look, you can hire me, you can talk to me, and we're going to sit down, go over your whole situation, talk about pros and cons of everything. And my job is to educate the client so they can make a smart and intelligent decision. So I do the same thing. Somebody calls me, I'm closing the sale too. I'm closing them on the idea that they should hire me to help them figure out what to do and pay me a flat fee to be on their side and figure this out. So everybody is making sales. So let's not try to pretend like, oh, I'm different, right? And oh, I don't need your money. I'm just out here. It would be great if I could be out here for free doing it. I've not yet reached that level of success where I can just do it all day long for free. I've got kids too, but you just got to understand what it is the person on the other end of the line is trying to close you, and make sure that close you on, and make sure that that's what you need.
All right, so let's talk about the holy trinity of debt relief: bankruptcy, debt settlement, credit counseling. If you call one of those agencies or outfits, you're going to be pitched their solution as a magical solution. But one size does not fit all, does it?
No, and I've got kind of a standard thing I've developed over the years where I'm always tell my clients, is like, look, okay, so you go to a bankruptcy attorney, they're going to tell you debt settlement is a scam, credit counseling is too expensive, right? You call the debt settlement company, they're going to say, oh, bankruptcy is the most horrible thing ever. It's going to ruin your life for 10 years. Your wife's going to leave you. Your dog's going to leave you. Your kids are going to hate you, right? You can't do the bankruptcy. And credit counseling is just way too expensive. You need to hire us instead. And then you go talk to a credit counseling company, and they're going to say the same stuff about bankruptcy and why it's horrible and it should be avoided at all costs. And then they'll also say that debt settlement is a scam and credit counseling is really the only legitimate way to get out of the debt. So they're all just kind of selling against each other. That's all it is.
You go to a settlement company website. I was answering a reader question yesterday, and I saw this. It's very typical. You go to the site, and inevitably there is a page about compare options. And
the option page.
And on this option page, debt settlement was labeled.
Wait, Steve. I've heard this one before. So on the compare page, this is where they legitimately compare all the different options so you can make an informed decision as a consumer. Right? Okay.
And
I'm with you.
Debt settlement is labeled top choice. Okay.
No.
And bankruptcy said it would ruin your credit for a long time. It was very difficult to qualify for, and it took 3 to 6 months. Your credit would be ruined forever. How does a consumer make an informed decision or even learn what the truth is when they read information like that? Because would you say that was a factual statement?
Well, obviously not. Plus, how could they make that as a blanket statement? How could bankruptcy be the worst option for every single situation?
Yeah, it can't.
It can't. But so just the fact that they have a page that puts bankruptcy as the worst option for everybody that looks at the page means it's bullshit.
Well, the other thing you see oftentimes is bankruptcy is the last resort.
Yeah.
Which I don't understand what that means. Once you've tried everything else and it hasn't worked, then you turn to bankruptcy. Or I think the key is finding the right tool for the right situation for the consumer to get the right result.
Yeah. And, and I tell my clients all the time, I filed personal bankruptcy in 2012. And when I was going through it, I did not want to file bankruptcy because, I was still doing this. I mean, I've been helping people with debt since 2002, sometime back then. So my whole thought process was, and of course, this was when the housing market crashed and I lost my shirt when, I had a house in California. And I mean, it was a bad scene back in 2008 is kind of when it all started to go down. And, 2008, 9, 10, 11, it became very apparent that I'm needing to file a bankruptcy.
Well, let me interject for a second because I've known you since before you did that. I just can constantly remember saying, Damon, you have to file. Damon, you have to file. Damon, you have to file. You need a fresh start. You need a fresh start. And you were extremely resistant, as is everybody, until you reached the point you were going to tell us.
I was. And, in my situation, I just charged close to $400,000. So we're not talking about a small little amount of debt here. But my thinking, because, I had a strategy and a plan, but my thinking was, well, if I can earn enough money, earn my way out of this and negotiate the debts down, then that's fine. But I mean, it got to the point where it was just obvious I would have to earn such an obscene amount of money in a short amount of time that the BK just made more sense. But the reason in my head that I was so resistant was not so much from a personal standpoint or personal credit or anything like that. It was more, from the standpoint of, I'm a financial consultant. How could I possibly file for bankruptcy? My professional life would be over and ruined, and I would have to go flip burgers or something else, because who's going to listen to a financial consultant that's filed bankruptcy? So that was what was in my head. And of course, up to that point, I'd not ever filed personal bankruptcy before.
Mhm.
So even though this was what I did for a living, I still didn't have a solid understanding of what it was actually like, the process to go through it and then come out the other side, until I actually did it. And when I pulled the trigger and I did it and I wiped out the debt, my income just took off after that. Things went really, really great. Because before I filed, I was kind of mentally keeping my income down. Not on purpose. I think it was just a subconscious thing, because I didn't want to price myself out of a Chapter 13. I know I'm getting too much into the weeds here, but
No, but you were also suffering from what a lot of people do, which is you were down and out. It's hard to succeed when you're feeling desperate rather than inspired. So
yeah.
that's typical.
Yeah. But the funny thing is, once I filed, I had this freedom. The debt was gone. I could focus on the business and grow the business. And, the funny thing is, that was 2012. So the bankruptcy is still on my credit in 2021, right? If you pull up my credit, there's a bankruptcy. But you wouldn't know it. Nobody would know it. I mean, I've got more credit cards than I can count. I mean, heck, I have an American Express Platinum card. I've had that for years. We drive nice cars. We can finance them. I live in a nice house, and people go, wait. Your life should be horrible for 10 years because you filed bankruptcy. And the reality was, no, actually, I got a brand new freaking credit card from Capital One the day I got my bankruptcy discharge. It was literally in the mailbox the same day, because after I filed, Capital One solicited me. I go, oh, you've got this fresh start card. We see you just filed bankruptcy. Here you go. Here's a new card. Now, granted, it was like a fresh start card. It was like a $500 limit or something like that, but it was no interest for a year. It was like, hey, we know you need to kind of start to rebuild. So here you go. So I applied and I got it. And it was just coincidence that it literally showed up in the mailbox the same day I got my discharge papers. But it's like, wait a minute. I thought I'm supposed to be this credit pariah for 10 years. And all of a sudden I got these new cards, within, 2 years after BK, you can qualify for FHA financing.
Oh, yeah.
On a mortgage again.
Yeah. New car rates.
And I'm not going to lie. It wasn't like as soon as I filed, everybody was throwing, loans at me or anything, because there's a lot of shady stuff going on that you got 25% car loans and stuff like that. The first couple of years you got to watch out for. But once you got past those first 2 or 3 years, you could, and you kept your nose clean, you didn't have, reoccurring problems. You can easily build your credit up to, in many cases, better than it was before you filed, because before you filed, you owed all this money to everybody and nobody's going to loan you anything.
So let's go back to debt settlement. I am a debt settlement person, and you're talking to me, and I'm telling you it's going to ruin, bankruptcy is going to ruin your credit forever. It's the worst thing that you can do. It's the last resort. You should never do that. And I never tell you that there might be any credit report or credit score implications from bankruptcy. But that's not true. There are implications, aren't there?
You mean from debt settlement?
Yes, I'm sorry. From debt settlement, yes.
Yeah, and again, I'm not saying bankruptcy is always the right answer and debt settlement's never the answer. It's the point is, it depends on your specific circumstances, where you're at in your life, and what you're trying to accomplish. But that's the point. Is it's always a one size fits all with these debt relief companies. But yes, to answer your question, Steve, there are big implications to your credit report from debt settlement, because the way it works is literally you fall behind on your cards. Whether you hire a company or you don't hire a company, you're falling behind. Payments are not getting made. You're getting 30-day late, 60-day late, 90-day late. Some of these are going to charge off if you don't settle before that. These things are going to stay on your credit report for several years. Once you settle the debt, that's going to help, because you're not going to owe the money. But while you're going through the process, especially if they've got you on a 3, 4, 5, sometimes 5-year payment plan. Oh, I'm doing air quotes on the payment plan, because there is a real payment plan. Your credit is going to be in the crapper for several years. So it's not like bankruptcy ruins your credit longer than debt settlement can. So you got to weigh the pros and cons of, debt settlement is going to cost you a lot more money than a Chapter 7 bankruptcy will. And they're both going to ruin your credit for a couple of years. So you got to be aware of that.
So even if you file, even if you go the debt settlement route, If you've defaulted, fallen behind on your accounts, that can be reported up to 7 years on your credit report. And the amount of debt that was forgiven that they wiped off, that ends up being reported as a bad debt on your credit report. So, I mean, there are things to consider along with bankruptcy.
Yeah. And the other thing you have to look at, and this is the favorite thing, my favorite thing that salespeople always accidentally miss. In some cases, in many cases, depending on your situation, again, everything, you noticing a theme, Steve? Everything depends on your situation. You can't have a generic, solution. It's got to be specific to your problem. But for people that have a positive net worth, which means if you add up all your assets and you add up all your liabilities, you have a positive number. Congratulations, you're winning at the game of life. But bad news, you could potentially have taxes due on any debt that was forgiven. Salespeople tend to overlook that, mainly because because they don't either know it or understand it, because their job is to sell something, not to actually execute the strategy and then help the client figure it out at the end. Like, oh, congratulations, your debt's all settled. Here's 40 grand that you owe the IRS. So wait a minute. Nobody told me about that. It's like, well, that's not our job. Call a CPA, like, there you go. We're done. We got paid. Goodbye.
Give us an example when debt settlement is a smart thing in a specific situation.
So debt settlement can be a good strategy if a Chapter 7 bankruptcy would be what I call unpalatable for the client. And I always have a problem with my tongue when I say palatable. Is that how, am I saying it right?
That sounds good, palatable. Yeah. Palatable.
Palatable. I sometimes call it a non-starter if I'm feeling particularly tongue-tied during that consult. I'm like, we have to look, because the way I do consults with clients is I do it by process of elimination, right? No matter what we do, if you're coming to me with a problem and we've got debt, there's going to be some sacrifice required, no matter what, whether we're going full-blown Dave Ramsey style, living debt free and eating beans and rice and doing that role, or, debt snowball or credit counseling or debt settlement or even bankruptcy. No matter what we do is going to require some level of sacrifice than you're used to. Right. And because most of the time people have been living beyond their means, and not every time. Sometimes there's situations that come up and, scams or medical issues or something like that to get into the debt. But whatever we do is going to involve some kind of a change, right? Whether it's changing expenses or whatever it is, there's going to be some sacrifice. So, and what is the right sacrifice is up to the client. It's not up to me. I'm not the guy that can say, this is the wrong sacrifice to make and this is the right sacrifice, because it's the client's money. It's their credit, it's their life, so it's their decision. So my job is to kind of go through all those options and say, okay, look, for your specific situation, if we look at bankruptcy, your life's going to look like this. This is how it's going to kind of play out. We can meet with a bankruptcy attorney, get the facts, looking at Chapter 7 or looking at Chapter 13. If we go the settlement route, this is kind of how I think you should do that. And this is what's going to be the positives of that and the negatives of that. And for your situation, this is how much it's going to cost you. And this is how long it's going to take, yada, yada, yada. And we just got to go through all that stuff. So the client can then take a step back and say, okay, none of that sounds awesome, but what sounds the least not awesome?
Right.
Or however you want to say that. Like, what's the best bad situation?
Yeah.
It's not going to be fun. Right. So for somebody like, to answer your question, when would settlement be a great option? Settlement would be a great option when there's a non-starter in a Chapter 7 bankruptcy, right? Where maybe they live in a state where they own a home and they live in a state where the equity would not be protected, and a Chapter 7 would necessitate them selling their house, and they don't want to sell their house, right? It's up to them. It's their house. Right. It's not my house. Yep. And so to them, that would be a non-starter. To somebody else, they might say, I hate this damn house. I've been trying to get out of it forever. And if I lose the house in a BK, that could be the best thing ever. For that client, that's not a non-starter. A BK might make more sense. So really, whenever a bankruptcy is just not going to be a good option or not palatable to the client, and they're willing to pay more money to get out of the debt, right? Because a bankruptcy, a Chapter 7 is always going to be the cheapest from a how much is it going to cost me standpoint.
So to let people know, it's going to be $2,000 or less for a Chapter 7 bankruptcy, and your debt is going to be discharged tax-free within 90 to 120 days. It's a very quick, inexpensive process.
Yeah. So and all you got to do is you got to look at it. You got to make sure, do I qualify? because a lot of people say, oh, I haven't met with the bankruptcy attorney because I'm afraid, right? I don't want to lose my house, or I don't want this to happen, or whatever they read on the debt settlement website.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
That scared them away from bankruptcy. But the thing is, I have my client, if bankruptcy looks like a viable option, I'll look at it. And if it looks like it's viable, it doesn't hurt to meet with the attorney and gather some information. That's all we're doing.
Right. You're encouraging them to go and learn. They don't have to commit to file. Just be informed.
Yeah. And I always tell my clients, look, and I'll hold your hand. I mean, that's what I'm here for. I'll contact the attorney. If I already know them, then I'll make the introduction. If I don't, I'll help you find somebody, explain to the attorney, hey, here's what the client's looking for. We've got these specific questions, and they want to, it used to be go in for a consult, but these days almost everything's done over the phone.
Mm-hmm.
You just do a phone consult with the attorney. I find it's a lot less scary for most people if they know they've got somebody like me that's kind of made that connection, and then they know they're going to get the information and then circle back with me and say, and then, hey, Damon, this is what the attorney said.
Yeah, let me talk it through with you. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's that way they're not trying to figure this out on their own, That way they can have somebody that knows this stuff that can say, And I've had cases like that where client would come back and they would, the attorney said Chapter 7 wasn't going to work and we have to do a 13 and it's going to be this and this. And I would just go, That, again, I don't want a Monday morning quarterback because I'm not a bankruptcy attorney. But it wouldn't hurt to talk to a different bankruptcy attorney just to see, right?
Get a second opinion.
Because there's also bad bankruptcy attorneys out there. They're not all great.
That's true.
Some are great, but some aren't.
So one of the things you hear is the reason I want to go debt settlement route is because I want to honor the promise to repay my creditors. I don't want to file bankruptcy and walk away from my debt. But isn't the reality that in debt settlement, you're not repaying them fully anyway?
Correct.
And then when you say to somebody, you can still repay your creditors even if you file bankruptcy, the general reaction I hear is, why would I do that?
Yeah. And my response is, I don't know. You're the one that said you wanted to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, but again, the main thing is there are, reasons not to file BK and, look at settlement or look at credit counseling, look at other apps, because sometimes the non-starter is simply the client saying, I absolutely don't want to file bankruptcy. I don't feel comfortable with it. I don't want to do it. And again, it's not for me to say, well, that's stupid, or I don't agree with that, because it's not my life, right? It's the client's life.
Right.
And I have had situations where the client would prefer to pay back what they can afford rather than do a BK, or a BK would be more all encompassing versus, selective debt negotiation, which is what they preferred. So there are lots of situations where the client might prefer a credit counseling approach or a Dave Ramsey approach or settlement over a BK, but the client needs to figure that out. And the only way they can figure that out is if they have all the options, all the information in front of them, and make that decision not based on a misunderstanding of what one strategy would be versus another. And that's what they get out there in the marketplace, is a big misunderstanding of how it all works.
Under the heading of full information, one thing that people are never told, I find, is that if you go and talk to a bankruptcy attorney, you decide you're going to you file Chapter 7, which the vast majority of people do, and your debt is discharged. 100% of your debt is discharged. That's included in the Chapter 7. But Damon, not 100% of debt is discharged in a debt settlement plan, is it? Because people don't always finish those plans. They don't complete them.
I was sitting here as you're talking, I was realizing this was supposed to be about how did debt settlement podcast turn into bankruptcy podcast?
Well, I think the reason is because the only way you can talk about settlement is to compare it.
That's a good point. Again, process of elimination. But it's just funny. I'm like, everything we're talking about is bankruptcy. This is supposed to be an explanation of debt settlement, and we're talking about why you should look at bankruptcy too, which is still good information. But the next podcast will be all about debt settlement, how it works and how it doesn't. We're going to put the title of this podcast, Bankruptcy versus Settlement, Compare and Contrast.
We'll have to go back and redo the intro on this one.
Yeah. Oops.
Well, we're kind of running out of time, but one of the differences I would like to point out is that when you call a debt settlement company, they're starting with the solution first. And when somebody talks to you, you're starting with the destination first. Where do they want to wind up? And then figure out what's the best path to get there. That's a huge difference.
Well, it's a major difference. I mean, you call a debt settlement company or a credit counseling company or a bankruptcy attorney, doesn't matter. They're going to talk to you. They're going to do a free consult, right? It's going to be 30 minutes, 45 minutes. Before that consult's over, they've got a plan already. They don't know anything about you except maybe, hey, what do you make a month? How much debt do you have? How much is your mortgage? Some cursory information. And here's your plan. Here's how we're going to get rid of your $100,000 problem off a 20, 30-minute phone call.
Mm-hmm.
By contrast, when I bring on a client, my focus, most clients, they're a client for a month or two, right? We're going to take the time to really go through everything and figure out everything that's going on in their life, look at all these different strategies, and then they can make the same decision that these companies want them to make after 30 minutes. I typically give it up to 2 months of back and forth stuff. Now, it doesn't mean we're having an hour-long consult every single day for 2 months, but and it's not going to take me 2 months. Once I'm looking at the client's financials, I've been doing this almost 20 years. I don't need 2 months to figure out what they need to do. I'm usually going to know it on that first call once I'm looking at all the finances and I've gotten to know a little bit more about the client and what's important to them. But the time is for the client to have, the time to research it, to dwell on it, to sleep on it, whatever they need, so they can, make sure they're not feeling rushed into a very important decision. So that's the big difference. If you have a predetermined solution in mind, you can do a pitch and shove a contract in front of somebody in 30 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
If you flip it around and say, okay, let's design a solution around your actual problem, well, that takes longer. That takes an understanding of the actual problem and an understanding of the client. A sales guy doesn't have time to do that, and he doesn't get paid to do that because, heaven forbid, the right solution is not something he sells.
Well, you and I talk at least daily, at least about a different consumer situation. And just yesterday, we were talking about somebody that has a situation that looks like a very clear solution is needed, but there no way are they emotionally or mentally ready to make those hard choices.
Yeah, and that that factors in too. I often say I'm kind of part Dave Ramsey, part Dr. Phil, because what is it that you say all the time about debt and money problem wrapped up in emotion? Or Steve says it better. What do you say?
Debt is just a math problem wrapped in emotion.
Yeah, and that's and that's something where you can't just say, oh, let me give you a label. You're going to fix this with debt settlement, because the other thing is, there's a million, when you say debt settlement, yeah, there's the way the debt settlement companies do it, and it seems like a nice, neat little package deal, and you pay the money or whatever. But there's actually a million different ways that kind of a negotiation strategy can be implemented, right? And if you take it from an individual standpoint, it looks different for every single person. So even if you could have 10 people that say, oh, debt negotiation or debt settlement is the right strategy for these 10 people. But the actual strategy could be completely different for all 10 of them, just based on their situation. It's going to be different. But you hire some company and has a one-size-fits-all program, you're going to get shoved into it, even if that's not the most optimal way to solve your problem. Their job is not to solve it optimally. Their job is just to collect money and then maybe get it done. And that's what you get.
And debt settlement comes in different flavors too. At least it comes under different names. You've got debt settlement, debt negotiations, debt intervention, debt validation, maybe. It might be called a bunch of different things. We just want people to ask questions and not feel compelled that they have to make a decision on that initial phone call. And also, one more thing is just realize that if you got something in the mail or somebody reached out and called you, they are trying to make a sale. They are not calling to provide you with the best financial advice. So just consider that. Well, Damon, we've come to the end of another podcast. You've been listening to Damon Day, who is at the website damonday.com. And you should feel free to reach out and talk to him.